interesting job. So I was called to underfloor heating on a Worcester bosch boiler, and when the underfloor heating system comes on, boiler bangs, clangs, makes loads of noise, unless the radiator room stat is on, because the underfloor heating manifold was connected onto, I don't know if you can see, capped off at the back there. So this is on, put off of a radiator circuit, and there was a zone valve in here. So basically, if the radiators weren't calling for heat, and even on the room stat, the zone valve upstairs was shut, supplying no water to this manifold. But the manifold was connected electrically to the boiler via the zone valve, causing the boiler to fire. So there was no circulation. The pump upstairs was just deadheading. There was an automatic bypass, but it wasn't adequate, and the boiler was starting to jump and bang and clang on the wall. So the only fix for that was to turn the room stat in the hallway up to maximum, so that the heating didn't switch off while you ran the underfloor heating. A bit inconvenient. So looking at a fix for this, so what I've done is I've disconnected it from the radiator circuit. Conveniently, the manifold is just under the boiler, and we've gone in to the return pipe on close coupled T's up there. And then the problem was that, okay, that would stop, that would give us a circuit that wasn't controlled by the zone valve upstairs predominantly, with the radiator. The radiator wouldn't have to be on, sorry, but the boiler is still going to be called for heat when there's no flow. So I've removed the zone valve from the underfloor heating downstairs, replaced it with a relay to do the electrical function of it. And what I've done, I've installed a zone valve directly back to my return circuit. So when the underfloor is on, this valve will open and allow the water to circulate, creating a primary circuit for my closely spaced T's to operate from on the return to the boiler. The problem with that is, of course, is that that's the short circuit. I've been telling everyone not to use close coupled T's on underfloor heating because it creates a short circuit. So how do we deal with that? Well, what I've done is I've built a relay box so that should the central heating or the hot water be on, it will close this valve, because we've already got the circuit that we want our pump to prioritise. So now we've got the return coming back, having heated the radiators or having heated the hot water to supply the underfloor heating system. This valve is closed. So at the moment we have nothing on by the looks of it. Underfloor is off. Yeah, everything's off, which is a shame. So if underfloor was on, I would be able to turn on either the hot water or central heating up at the timer, and you would see this valve close and either one of the other two valves open. So really pleased with that. I think it's a good fix. Very often you'll see that when an extension's been added, there's underfloor added near the boiler. The boiler's downstairs, and it's how to pipe this up and make it function. Now, just for the electric side, obviously off of these motorised valves, we've got the orange wire going back to the boiler. So when the underfloor heating system switches on downstairs, it tells us up here by making the orange wire reverse live. So we know that the underfloor heating system's on to drive this valve when the orange becomes live, and there is no on signal to either of the other two motorised valves. So using a bit of binary thought there, we can use the relays to identify when there is only a signal for underfloor heating off of the orange wire and no signal for the other two, which leaves us driving open this valve. So and actually the wiring is very simple. The relay wiring is very, very simple. I thought it was going to be really complicated. I went and sat down with a kebab to work it all out, and about 2 minutes later I had the wiring diagram knocked out for that. Two relays up here to create the circuitry for this control, and one relay downstairs just to replace the motorised valve. I could have left the motorised valve in place, but I needed one for up here. So I took it out from downstairs, replaced it with a relay. I got hundreds of relays on board, but I haven't got lots of zone valves. I don't keep new ones on board, I only keep second-hand ones on board now because I take so many of them out when I'm fitting the Viessmanns. So yeah, that was it. So I'm very chuffed with that. Works really, really well. We don't have a short circuit, and we've got full functioning underfloor on close couple of T's, and not expensive, reasonably cheap. The relays 5-10 quid each. So thank you. Okay, I was asked yesterday to follow on from the video I did of a system where I'd been called out to rectify the banging and clanging boiler due to the underfloor heating system being incorrectly installed. So I've done both a hydronic schematic and an electrical schematic to explain the system. So rather than deal with what was wrong, which is in the other video, let's deal with the end design. Now, I'm not suggesting this would be a good design from scratch. This is a design I used to put right what I think is already a poor design. No weather compensation, no low temperature supply to the underfloor, but it is pretty much a common installation, and also could be a situation where you are asked as an installer to add an underfloor heating circuit to an extension, which very often would include the boiler on the ground floor. That's something we see a lot, and we see them connected incorrectly or in a manner that doesn't work quite commonly. So this would be a design for overcoming that problem, not a design. If you were putting in a system and you put this system in from scratch, I would be very disappointed. But it's your choice. Anyway, so the end design is we have a heat-only boiler. This could be done on a system boiler, doesn't matter. It's open vented. Spotted my first mistake. Sorted. So it's open vented, and it's a standard S plan as I found it with a bypass. What I've done is I've added in this bypass valve, and I've repiped the underfloor heating on close couple T's on the return to the boiler. So obviously the return to the boiler is where the water's coolest, and this is a low temperature system. So it makes sense to take the water off here and further reduce the return water to the boiler. So what happens in this system design is that if either of these two valves are open, providing a path return back to the boiler, so that the underfloor can pick up its heat, this valve will be closed. So there is no short circuit, no bypass circuit, other than the balanced pressure bypass. So this one will not operate or bypass unless the TRVs on the radiators are closing down and it needs to balance out the pump. Just to add, this was actually faulty when I arrived on the original job. But okay, so that's the case. Now, if either of these two valves close and there's a demand for heating on the ground floor, this valve will open, and this will provide a primary circuit back to the boiler, from which we have our closely coupled T's operating. So that's my flow, and that's my return back to that system, and this is driven by this pump to go back to my boiler. So it's pretty simple schematic. This was easy to add in, that the return up in the cylinder cupboard, and it was just a matter of adding this one extra zone valve. Now that could be more difficult if the three T's rule hadn't been followed by the cylinder, but if you're in any cylinder cupboard and you've got your flow after your pump and you've got your return from your cylinder, you should be able to add this valve into that system and achieve this new hydronic system and then add your underfloor heating on closely coupled T's, offer the return as per that diagram. Okay, so that's the hydronics. Let's go over the page and look at the electrical circuit. So, right, time controller, radiator stat, cylinder stat, underfloor heating stat. The time control doesn't have to be laid out. This is a schematic just to get an understanding of the system. This line is a mistake, so ignore that line. I can't find any correction for it. I've got an additional 2 relays in the cylinder cupboard, and those relays are powered by the signal to the hot water valve and the signal to the radiator valve and the signal to the hot water valve, which operate either one of these relays. The relays are linked together across the common, and they have a feed in from the orange wire. So when the underfloor heating is on down here, the orange wire becomes live. This feeds into this relay, and it's used to actually open the bypass valve, but it can only connect to the bypass valve when neither the cylinder stat or the radiator stat are calling. If either of those call, they will break this circuit and close the bypass valve. The orange also is connected to the boiler and to the system pump, and the system pump could be connected to the boiler, but for diagrammatic purposes I've left it connected to the orange wire. Obviously I've omitted neutrals and permanent lives, etc, except for where it's not usual, which is on the underfloor heating relay. So originally on the underfloor heating system that I was putting right, there was a motorised valve there, but there was no purpose for the motorised valve once we changed it to closely coupled T's. So I replaced it with a relay, and I actually reused the valve upstairs for my bypass valve. So on this relay we've got permanent live, and I've also made another mistake here. If the underfloor heating stat calls for heat, it operates the underfloor heating pump, opens the relay, which livens up the orange wire, which livens up the system pump, the boiler, and backfeeds through this relay to open up the bypass valve. Now, in an ideal world, there'd be some kind of delay circuit for this underfloor heating pump, but don't forget this is on close coupled T's, so actually there isn't any deadheading, and it's also on an underfloor, so there's no deadheading of this pump because there's no motorised valve controlling that circuit. So time control, time delay can be ignored on that one. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Let me give you a sideways shot if anyone